Okay, just before we begin, I'm going to go through a few housekeeping items, pretty simple. Feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. We're not going to do like a designated Q&A section, but we want it to be as interactive as possible. So raise your hand, comment questions in the Q&A. And just so everyone knows, this will be recorded and the slides and recording will be sent out after the webinar, probably by tomorrow or Monday. But other than that, Tom, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Madigan.
Mhm.
Thanks for everybody for joining us today. Whether it's your morning or afternoon, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk grocery stores and preparing for the holiday season. So that's the theme for the webinar today. And if you're on the webinar today and we haven't had a chance to meet yet, or you haven't participated in one of the webinars, let me take a second to introduce myself. So I'm Tom. You might see on the screen Thomas, but I go by Tom. And a little about my history. So I have worked with many organizations over the course of the last 20 years, more than 250, in fact. And the theme of all my work over the last 20 years has been to help organizations save energy and save money. So I've worked across many different diverse industries and sectors. And the focus has always been reducing the energy to cut costs and try to move an organization towards the highest level of efficiency possible. And one of the common themes throughout that entire time has been using the software tool Energy Cap. And obviously, that's who I work for now. So if you're unfamiliar with Energy Cap is a utility bill software tracking tool that has different features, and they're identified here: Carbon Hub, Smart Analytics, and we also offer bill capture services. So Energy Cap, our core mission is to help our clients use their utility data and turn it into something that can help them be more energy efficient. And so the theme of today's webinar is to really focus on grocers and trying to help the grocers try to be as efficient moving into the holiday season and then even beyond. You'll see today, I want to focus maybe 10 minutes on the upcoming couple months and then really look beyond that, get into hopefully a dead period or a slower period of time when we get into 2026, where you can focus your energies on trying to establish some new patterns and strategies for saving money in the new year. So if you could respond to this poll, many times when I do these webinars, I like to find out who's on the poll. If it's people that are new to energy management or people that are experienced, and because of my experience, I try to cater to the audience there. If you wouldn't mind just responding. Okay, thank you. So it looks like we've got a few people who are starting on, and a few people that have been around a little while. But with that as a backdrop, let's get into the agenda and talk about the content for today's webinar. So I want to start by focusing on the challenges that many of you face in operating your grocery stores and the businesses. Talk about then where a lot of the waste is usually found in this industry. And as I mentioned earlier, just talk about what we can do in the short term to maybe capture some savings through the holiday season, then put together a long-term strategy beginning of next year, and then close with some final thoughts on how I think this whole thing needs to play out in order for you to be successful. I'd like to also start the beginning of the webinars with a disclaimer. I've worked so many different places, and I recognize that every organization is unique. They have different savings opportunities and different challenges that have to be overcome for them to get to where they want to go. So please, as you listen to some of my ideas and thoughts, take these recommendations and translate them into your world. Vet them out, carefully consider them, because what might be right for one is not right for another. So give that some thought and try to take the best of what I can offer and turn it into what's best for your organization. Jumping into the challenges that grocers face is in this industry, as you know better than anybody else, is there's huge profitability pressures that you're operating on razor thin margins. And so you're always looking for ways to save. And knowing that the energy budget to operate the stores and keep the lights on and keep the refrigeration going is significant. And so it's a major line item in a budget and major expense that grocers have. And that's why we have to focus on it, because it's an opportunity to save. It's also an industry where the energy use is very intense. There's a high dependency and high risk, right? We've got to make sure the stores are operating, refrigeration's working. We don't want to spoil food or lose product. And things need to be running nearly 24/7. Many grocers are working on a 24/7 schedule or close to it, 20 hours a day, 18 hours a day. So the industry is such, it's very energy intensive and there's high risk involved. What we found in our client base, the people that use Energy Cap as a product, is that they've come from a place where they were doing manual and inefficient accounting processes. If you can imagine, you have dozens, maybe even hundreds of different stores that you're trying to account for all the utility bills. Doing manual bill entry or trying to do that in an efficient way is very, very challenging and difficult. And then it's the domino effect of trying to do all the accounting, trying to get all those bills paid. And what we're offering in the discussion today is looking at it through a different lens and trying to offer you an alternative for helping this process be more efficient. Because the data struggles to get into a common place, whether it's a spreadsheet or a place that can be studied, the data gets fragmented and you don't have great visibility into each of the stores and the energy data. And with my experience in the industry, I know that's a critical piece if you want to manage your facilities better, is you have to know where the energy is being used and how much, and you have to monitor it over time. So this is a huge problem if you don't have a tool in order to keep all of the data organized in one place. Also in the industry, there are compliance and sustainability pressures that are growing, more expectations for both performance, reduced emissions, and it's changing how we operate our buildings, and it's forcing people to look at ways that they can improve. I mentioned a second ago, this idea of spoilage, huge deal, right? We can't have failures with equipment because of the risk of losing product. So it's always hanging over our head, wanting to make sure that things stay working the way they're supposed to. And then it's the technology gaps. In this industry, there seems to be a big disparity between organizations that have the technology and solutions, technical controls in their buildings and their spaces, and those that do not. And so some organizations are challenged by having older systems and having to come up with ways in order to manage them, in order to save money. So the challenges are many. Like most industries, these are just specific to the grocery industry. So let's jump into a conversation about where the waste is. The big one, as you might guess, is refrigeration inefficiencies. Many organizations have old refrigeration units, things that are beyond their life cycle and really should be replaced, so they run in a very inefficient way. Motors short cycle and they don't operate efficiently. And so if you're looking for ways to save, we have to start looking at the refrigeration if there's improvements that can be made there. Another common theme across the entire energy industry is what I call controls disregard. As part of most building projects, nowadays, most organizations install some type of control system to control the HVAC in their facilities. But what happens in many instances, as buildings are built or renovated, and the controls are installed near the end of the process, there's a rush to get the building completed and get it up to speed. And in that process, the commissioning that goes through and is part of the overall plan gets either decommissioned where people remove funding from it, or it doesn't get used at all, or it gets shorted on the effort. And so as a consequence of that, the controls don't work the way they're designed, and ultimately the buildings just don't operate to the best of their ability. So the controls disregard is a big deal across all industries, but I think in particular, the grocery industry. A similar thing happens with HVAC neglect. Many businesses are operated, they get their HVAC through rooftop units. And because there are so many rooftop units on a facility, it's easy to neglect them. It's easy to ignore preventive maintenance, or schedules get behind and people just don't get to it. And so the systems just start to limp along. And sometimes people don't even realize they're not doing well because they're neglected. So if you're pursuing opportunities to save, you have to take a look at those HVAC systems as part of your process. Another item is rogue overrides. People will, when they service their equipment, so let's say a technician goes on the roof to service a rooftop unit, they might take the rooftop unit for testing purposes and put it into an override state. That way they can test it to make sure that it's working properly, and ultimately they can solve a problem. But the challenge is that it gets left in the override state. And so it can never go into a setback mode, or it never changes the way it functions and ultimately uses the maximum amount of energy. This seems like such a small little thing, but it can really add up if you're tight for staff and tight for time and things get put into an override state. It can become a real problem. The next thing on the list is peak demand hits. Because we're in an industry where the HVAC, the refrigeration, the lights, most systems are running nearly all day long, we can set huge demand peaks. And if you're unfamiliar with the billing stream and how you're billed, these demand peaks can have very severe consequences on the bill. It starts with understanding when it's happening and how it's happening, and then looking for strategies to manage it in order to keep the costs lower. But it's a problem that needs to be pursued over the course of time. And finally, the last item on this list is what I call unprioritized CapEx, or capital expenditures that go without being prioritized, because people are making decision on what capital expenditures to make, but they're not considering utility data or the cost of things. They're essentially fighting fires. They're trying to do the best they can, but they're flying blind. They're flying without controls. And in this case, the controls are the utility data. The utility data tells the story of what buildings are running efficiently and those that are running inefficiently, and it has to be factored in order for you to correctly prioritize your capital projects. Now, for the next 5-10 minutes or so, I want to talk about the short-term ideas, things that you might consider when you take a look at the calendar. You know, we all recognize coming up in the next couple months, there's going to be some holidays. And for the grocery industry, it's a huge time, great demand, and things change a little bit. And so it's hard to put together a long-term plan, but let's talk about a short-term plan when we take a look at those holidays coming up. But you got to look at the calendar and think about, is there a unique opportunity with the stores operating in some type of different way where you can capture some savings or do some things a little bit different? I think it starts with a plan, and what I call a 5-step plan. And this is a general outline, but I think you'll see, hopefully it provides some guidance for how you might go about this. First thing you need to do is you need to build a management team, and you need to draft a playbook. What I mean by that is you need to bring people together, decision makers, people of authority, people that are managing the facilities, people that are working within the facilities. Bring a representative group of people together to talk about what can and maybe should be done in order to protect some savings around the holiday season. And you can't just talk, you need to come up with a plan. You need to draft a playbook. You need to talk about, hey, are we going to try to schedule things different in terms of the operation of the HVAC? Are we setting up holiday decorations around our facilities? And if so, is it lights? Is it mechanical things that need to be managed or put on some type of clocks or controlled in some way so they're just not using energy 24/7? Talk about those things, come up with ideas, and communicate it, get something down on paper so that it can be executed over time. And it also ends up being a document that you can reflect on next year and the year after that as you incrementally try to get better at these things over the course of time. The second thing on the list is identify and prioritize energy reduction measures. I would say you need to find out where you're spending the most amount of money and the most amount of energy. Take a look at those spaces, those buildings, those energy hogs, and put together plans around those, because that's where you're going to see the greatest amount of savings. So build the team, prioritize what you're going to manage, and then get out there and test it. Validate those assumptions. And if you're going to try to control the HVAC different or the refrigeration differently, get out there and test it to just see whether it can be done before game day, before the holidays actually hit, to make sure that you don't have any failures. Another important point that I think needs to be mentioned is don't look at all your stores or all of your buildings in the same way. Very likely you have a cross section of different types of buildings, from true grocery stores to maybe you have some facilities where administrators or office staff works, to warehouses. Most organizations have different types of buildings that operate differently. And don't paint this with a broad brush where you try to control them all the same or think about them all the same. And as another caveat to that, I'm sure there are people on the webinar today from different parts of the country where you might be in a cold environment or you might be in a warm environment, a humid environment around the country. You need to adapt your plan around what conditions you have in your part of the country in order to take advantage of the opportunities that may be unique to you and not to others. Next thing is you got to get everybody aligned. So you're building your plan. Many times this means you have to provide training for people. If you're going to ask people to manually turn something off or to manage it in a way that's unfamiliar to them, support them with training. Give them the knowledge they need in order to work it correctly. And this is something I've seen with consistency around the country, is this gets ignored. The assumption is that people will know what they're supposed to do. If I just direct them or email, communicate with them, they'll get it done. And I will caution you, say this just doesn't happen on its own. You need to put some effort into this to make sure people know the plan. And lastly, after going through all that work, now you got to try to execute your plan, manage things different, but then you got to get your buildings turned back on, or you've got to get them back to the normal state as we transition into the new year, get everything running smoothly and capture the results. Make sure you document what was successful, what was unsuccessful, so you don't have the same issues in the future. And each year that goes by, you get a little bit better at the process. So to summarize this, in the short term, get some people together, talk about it, try some things, experiment with some stuff, get out there, manage some things a little bit different this holiday season, learn from it, and then start to prepare for the new year. And in doing so, here's a philosophy that I want to share with you that I think is really important for both the holiday season and beyond. The philosophy is this: if you can't turn it off, set it back. And if you can't set it back, tune it up. Let me unpack this a little bit. This is the idea, I think, is a simple way of looking at energy management through a lens of how to approach reasonably your buildings, your systems, your facilities. What I mean by this is, if you can't turn it off, the number one thing you should try to do, if possible, is you should try to get things turned off if they're not being used, regardless of what it is, whether it's a refrigerator lighting, it's computers, it's lighting. If it's using energy, I mean, heck, if it's water that's flowing into a building and doesn't need to flow, let's get that sucker turned off. Let's turn off what we can turn off. That's when you're going to get the most benefit. Now, in this world of groceries, that doesn't happen too often that we can turn stuff off. So I would say the next thing is to try to set it back. And that's a fancy way or a creative way of saying, let's try to turn it down. Let's try to have it use less energy by adjusting it some way. So using the example of HVAC, maybe you can change the temperatures by a couple degrees. Okay, so you turn the temperature up or you turn the temperature down in order to seek savings during a certain time of the year or a certain time of the day. So you can't turn it off, try to turn it down. And if you can't turn it down because it's got to run 24/7, then I would say you got to tune it up. Building on that idea, tuning it up is, if you identified it as an item that's running all the time, make sure it's running as efficiently as possible. And so get a technician in there to take a look at it. Put it on a list of an item that needs to be analyzed, because if it's running, it should be running to the best of its ability. And this is where the energy data and the utility data can be very helpful for diagnosing these problems and finding these problems. So here's what I think is a good long-term strategy as we get into next year for how you could proceed and hopefully arrive at next holiday season in a better place, having saved money and a little bit more managed than how you are now. So start by centralizing your utility data. I mentioned earlier in the webinar that many people have struggled with this, where they use manual processes, or people don't share the same spreadsheets, or things get adjusted, changed, and the data just isn't as accurate as it could be. It's really important that you bring the data into one place so that everybody can see it and learn from it. Another tool that's out there, if you're unfamiliar with this, is what's called interval data or real-time data. This is critical in today's world as you are managing your facilities, of really understanding where the energy is going and how to manage things. I have a few examples here in the next few minutes I want to share with you of this real-time analytics. Another important piece that you have to build into your system next year is make sure you're using measurement and verification strategies and techniques to measure the performance of the projects you're trying to execute and to justify future projects. I want to talk about that a little bit more here in a minute as well. Prioritize your projects using data. Don't just kind of assume that one building is more expensive or less expensive than another building. One building's using more energy or less energy than another building. You got to find out. You got to look at your utility data and really unpack the buildings that are performing poorly and sink your money and efforts into those buildings. So prioritize your projects based on that. And I think the last piece that most organizations benefit from is evaluating your emissions and doing some reporting. It usually builds momentum. There's an expectation in the industry that more people are reporting on their emissions and meeting standards. And so build that into the process. I wouldn't start there. I'd get the data, collect the data, get it organized, start to use it to make changes, and then over time, communicate the emissions performance of your organization. So going into each of these categories, step number one was centralizing your data. I want to talk about why this is so important. So what you see on the slide here is this idea of duplicate bills or gaps in bills, overlapping bills. At Energy Cap, we see this with our clients all the time, where in the utility bill industry, utility companies, vendors really struggle to consistently give good, accurate data. So it's very common to see duplicate bills or to see gaps in the bills or overlapping bills or even multiple bills in the same period. By centralizing your data, it exposes this and empowers you to seek solutions to these problems. And most of our clients see anywhere between 1% to 3% in annual savings just solving these types of problems that are bookkeeping problems and organization problems. But getting your data into one spot really is critical in order to catch up with that money and make sure that you're not being overbilled or incorrectly billed. Another part of this is the bills now are going to tell you whether there are abnormal costs or abnormal use. So for most people, when they look at a bill, they don't have a recognition of, is that abnormal? Is it not abnormal? What about the use or the unit cost? Getting your data into one spot where it can consistently be viewed and charted and graphed, you are able to identify areas where there are things that are abnormal and then ultimately take action on those things. But it starts with centralizing your data and getting it into one organized spot. Another thing that might surprise you is, in this, through the years, it just amazed me how many times this has happened, is how many times organizations are paying for a bill that they're not even responsible for. Usually this happens as an organization grows, as new meters are installed in a building or stores are shut down. Something has changed in the field and organizations now mistakenly get bills that they're not responsible for. So what I would suggest in the new year, when you get through the holiday season, maybe you can focus some more effort on this, is make sure you're confirming the account ownership. Because if you have hundreds of stores and potentially thousands of bills, it's very likely you're paying for some bills that you're not supposed to be paying for. So put that on your radar, make that part of the plan. But again, it all comes back to, you got to get the data in one spot so you can begin to tackle these things and focus on these. Once the data is there, you can begin to benchmark it. And this is, once again, a critical piece for really seeing where the opportunities to save are, is you got to benchmark similar buildings and similar meters. You might put them in groups. Hypothetically, maybe what you could do is take all the buildings that you have are a similar size, and maybe they have similar mechanical systems. Maybe they all have rooftop units. You can compare them with one another and find out the ones that are using more energy compared to their peers, and then focus your energy there. Likewise with meters. And another example is maybe you got buildings that use chillers or some other type of mechanical system to air condition the building. You might throw them in the same bucket, compare them, and try to see if anything jumps out for inconsistencies. So use the energy use index as a tool to take a look at how your buildings are performing. And also consider Energy Star. If you're not part of Energy Star, you might set up an Energy Star portfolio manager account or use Energy Cap to help you do that. But share the data with Energy Star and get feedback to find out how you're performing relative to the norms around the country, because that'll educate you and inform you for making better decisions. Another layer to this is you can rank all your vendors and you can take a look at average unit costs. So the software Energy Cap affords you the ability for setting up these comparisons automatically and very quickly to take a look at how one meter is doing relative to another, and the outliers just jump off the page. And then you can take action with those. So take a look at average unit costs. It also is a great way of looking at how you're being billed. And if there's inconsistencies, one meter to another meter for how you're being billed, those also become outliers. And you can work to resolve those issues as well. So jumping into the second thing in the list of 5 things that I had, it's this idea of using real-time data. So let me talk about this for a few minutes here, and I'm going to assume that some of the call just don't have a lot of exposure to this. So I want to back up a little bit and just make sure you know exactly what we have here. So Interval data or real-time data is data that's flowing into a system, and you can graph it and chart it and unpack it to really understand the energy use in a building. So this data allows you to identify equipment that isn't behaving the way it's supposed to be. So I have a couple examples here in the first couple bullets of if you're able to schedule your buildings with a morning startup or an afternoon setback where they're supposed to turn on and turn off, you would be able to identify if they're not doing it when they're scheduled to do that. Or maybe you have a weekend or a holiday setback where you want to try to turn the buildings into a different state. It's not always off. Maybe it's down. You're changing airflows or you're doing something different in the building. This data will help expose whether it's working the way it's intended or not. A great thing for refrigeration is this third bullet, where it's frequent on and off of equipment cycling. Refrigeration equipment has to cycle on and off, but if it doesn't do it correctly, it's going to damage the equipment and shorten the life cycle of the equipment. This smart data, this interval data, allows you to see when that's happening, spot it, and then find a solution to get that piece of equipment some service. Another thing here is if you've got equipment running overnight, again, you're trying to ramp up your efforts to save and you're wanting to monitor, are things really working the way they're supposed to? It's a great way of finding stuff that's running that shouldn't. The next bullet item here is high base loads or load factor, power factor issues. These are things, once again, that allow you to learn about your buildings. Load factor is this idea of looking at how much load there is in the building relative to how much energy is used over the course of a period of time. High load factor means that your building is running at a high load over the course of a month of time, as a for instance. Percentages in the grocery industry might exceed 60, 70, 80%. Power factor is this idea of a building not effectively using the power that flows into it. Regardless, this data exposes those issues and allows you to seek solutions. Data also exposes demand management strategies. You've probably heard about peak shaving or load shaving, where you're trying to move loads at different times of the day in order to save cost. It's more about saving cost than it is about saving energy. This data is great for finding those areas and then putting together solutions for that. Another item that I like to highlight here is you can verify operation remotely. So this affords you the ability to be in one place and understand how your buildings are performing in another place without having to drive or send somebody over to a building to understand what's going on. So it's wonderful at being more efficient with your own time because you can better understand what's happening from a remote location. And the last thing on the list here is this data is great at calculating the ROI for projects or retrofits when you are able to do them in a building. By having this data, and I have an example I want to share with you in a minute, you can see how useful the data can be to justify a project that has happened and the performance of that project and whether it met expectations or not. So this picture here is a picture of real-time data, and with the theme of just making sure that I explain it clearly for anybody that's new to this. What you're looking at is a 24-hour load profile or energy use profile for a meter. The green wave that goes across the picture represents what has been normal behavior on this meter over the course of the last month of time. All right, so during the green area, there have been peaks and valleys, but it's all been contained within the region that's green, moving across the diagram from left to right. The black line represents the actual performance currently in the energy use that's happening, and you can see throughout the day. So at 3 a.m., at 6 a.m., and these data points are rolling in 15-minute intervals. So you see, for the most part, the black line stays within the green region for most of the day until we get to 3, 4, 5 o'clock, and all of a sudden the black line shoots out of the green region. This now becomes an outlier. This becomes a performance situation where, for some reason, we ended up using more energy than we are normally. And this should probably be investigated, particularly if it's happening consistently day after day. And the other thing that's in this picture that's not obvious is a blue vertical bar. That happens to be when you're charged the most for your electricity. So you can identify the regions and how cost is going to change. And what this suggests is we had the highest use at absolutely the worst time of the day because it was the most expensive. And that's the power of this data. is you're able to see when the energy is being used, you're able to relate it to how much it's going to cost, understand it, and then put together management strategies for how to lower it in order to drive down cost. Here's a similar chart, but a little different. This chart here is showing 7 days of time for a building that is able to set back. So if you notice carefully, there are some green bars here, and there are 5 different humps in the picture going across from left to right. Each one of those different humps represents a day of the week, and the flatter spot in the picture represents the weekend. What this data is showing you is that this building was able to turn on 5 days a week. It was able to shut down on the weekend, which in this situation is what you were trying to achieve. But the real powerful part of this is in the bottom right-hand corner. If you notice, there are some numbers down, if you can see my cursor here, where it measures, this data can be measured and how much energy is being used when it's on schedule, and over to the right here when it's off schedule. Those values, by taking a look at the picture and doing some simple arithmetic, you can figure out how much energy you're using during scheduled time or non-scheduled time. And if this happens to be a building where you've made some changes, you can measure those changes and you can quantify those changes in terms of ROI on a project. So this data is awesome because you can roll it up in graphs and charts and tables of data and disaggregate it for the purposes of really understanding what the impact is. This third graph is a little different. Here, it's real-time data of a water meter, not an electric meter. And here, what the green line represents is the usage of water that's occurring over the course of several days. And if you notice, initially, the green line is very close to 0, which means the meter is turned off, there's no usage. Meter was turned on, there's the hump in the data, and then it goes back to 0. But what you notice here over time is as the meter gets turned back on and these humps occur showing usage, the meter never returns back to 0. So the green line never returns back down to the x-axis, which means that very likely in this situation, the meter is leaking. A couple things. If you find this, you can then seek a solution, but this also would allow you to calculate and quantify the impact of that water meter. And if you're not aware of this, most water companies will forgive leaks on a meter, usually with some consistent period of time. Like if a meter has a leak once every 3 years, they'll forgive that. So if you take this data to the utility company and say, hey, look at this, I had a water leak, I wasn't responsible for it, this is the water company's responsibility, they will forgive that leak and refund your money. So having this is really powerful information because it can help you to try to recover money in some situations. So with that in mind, what we've mentioned so far is this idea of centralizing the data. It's using this real-time data to start to measure things. I want to introduce an idea that might be unfamiliar to you called cost avoidance. It's this idea of really trying to measure the performance of an event. So let me explain the graph that's here, the chart that's over on the right-hand side of the slide. What you see here is you see 3 bars, 3 vertical bars, and on the left-hand axis, you see energy use, and below there's labels like baseline conditions, adjusted to today's conditions, and so on. So what we've got here is in the first bar that's blue, where it says consumption and weather and the baseline conditions. What Energy Cap can do as a software is it can take all of your utility data and it can build a baseline for you. You can establish a fair baseline. And what it's going to do, it's going to take a look at the consumption that you had over a period of time. And for the purposes of this explanation, let's just say it's a month of time. But some data is weather dependent. If you're heating your stores or you're cooling your stores, the hotter or colder it is outside can influence how much your energy you're using. What Energy Cap does is it takes the consumption of data and it breaks it into 2 pieces, what's called base consumption and the consumption that's relative to the weather. And so the first bar here is showing that the software can break the consumption into 2 pieces and establish a baseline. The second bar represents, in order for you to do a fair comparison in today's situation, is you have to translate what you did in the baseline to what you have currently. And so the software has to build what's called an adjusted baseline to represent the conditions today. Now, I'm sure you noticed that the dark blue part of the bar has grown in the second bar, and the light blue part of the bar has shrunk. So some reasons why this might happen is, let's suppose in the baseline you had a 28-day bill, and now in today's conditions you have a 32-day bill. Since the bill period is longer, it wouldn't be fair to compare a 32-day bill with a 28-day bill. So what you need to do is you need to adjust your base consumption because you have more days in your billing cycle. Now, in terms of the weather, the light blue part of the bar is smaller. This would imply the weather in the base year was more severe than the weather is this year. You don't want to assume the same amount of weather usage if the conditions are less bad or less severe. And so we've taken the baseline data, we've converted it into today's conditions, and now we can truly compare what happened. So the actual conditions is this purple bar with weather. And if you notice in this situation, when you compare the two, when you've created this apples to apples comparison, there's savings. This is the concept of cost avoidance. It's this idea of taking a look at your baseline, how things have performed, factoring in weather and other additional factors as well, if you'd like. The software allows you to make adjustments and changes for things such as changes in square footage, or if you have a situation where you have a significant change in occupancy or usage change in a facility, it allows you to make changes so that ultimately you have a fair comparison between today's conditions and an adjusted baseline for you to make the judgment whether you've saved or whether you've lost. Now, I say all this and teach all this, if you haven't seen this, because it's a very powerful tool for calculating return on investment that many dismiss or they don't use. And I think you need to consider this, particularly if you know you have stores that are getting older and there's more need for repair and upgrades and renovations. This tool hopefully will empower you and your team to better measure those things to make better decisions. This picture here is a representation of this idea of cost avoidance before and after. So giving you a second to digest it, over here on the left, you see the energy use, and you see this darker blue line that goes across the picture. That's your energy use over time. The red vertical line in the middle is some change that took place. Maybe you put in new mechanical systems, put in new rooftops, you put in new lighting, but you've made some type of adjustment, and now you want to measure what's happening beyond that. Notice the blue line continues across the picture because your energy use is going down, but it starts to generate this idea of an adjusted baseline, what I described a minute ago, to create that fair comparison. And then the green shaded region represents the true savings. So when you roll up the savings, you get a number that is a fair comparison, the before and the after. This is the idea of cost avoidance. Trying to use these different graphs and charts to explain the concept. But the benefit is EnergyCap software does all this for you automatically. You can set the baseline, it adjusts for weather, you can put in all of these changes, and it will translate all this information into meaningful numbers that you can count on and rely on. And it's legitimate measurement and verification. As I went through the list a few minutes ago, the 5 items in the list, the 5th item was this idea of emissions reporting. Another great feature of EnergyCap is it automatically can create your emissions reports and do calculations of what the emission values are. I think this is important for a number of reasons. First and foremost is it protects the environment, and maybe at the same level of importance is it also allows you to share your success, and it drives change in your organization. And so having these numbers available and at the tip of your finger, they're just there. They calculate automatically. It gives your team insights for what's happening and allows you to inform your community and your stakeholders in terms of how you are performing. So this saves you hours of times from gathering spreadsheets and doing these calculations on your own, and it just happens automatically within the software. Another great part of what we have at EnergyCap is these factors. There's a library of factors contained right within the software, and you can also put in custom factors if you know that those factors are more accurate. But ultimately, this happens automatically as you try to manage your data, and then ultimately gives you these reports that you can communicate to your stakeholders. As we start to wind down the presentation here, I wanted to show you what's typical for many EnergyCap users is we've got this thing called the savings maturity model, which is a great representation for how many prospects use EnergyCap over time, and they see the benefit and the savings that occurs over the course of months and years of time. So taking you through this and working across the diagram from left to right, if you notice in that bottom left-hand corner, we talk about utility bill management. This is the idea of getting all your data into one central location and getting it organized. I mentioned earlier that most people see 1 to 3% savings when they do that. What some people choose to do is they see the value of this now. They start to see savings occurring and they say, you know what? I think we need more help. We need people to get the data in the software for us. So they automate their data. This is the idea of bill capture, where we can help our clients capture the data and get it into the software for analysis. So you can refocus your time on solving these problems or even reallocate the time to something different. But it's a way that we support our clients, and this generates additional savings. Usually in going through that, all of a sudden good things start to happen and people start to track their data more accurately, and people find opportunities to save. And they, as I mentioned earlier, they shut things off, they set things back, they tune things up, they make changes to behavior and to the way the mechanical systems are running. And this can generate very significant savings. This really has been my world, and where I've tried to help people is to find the ways they can turn things off or manage things in ways. And for many people, this produces additional savings, and it gets pretty big, 5 to 10% in savings. And if you're talking about budgets of millions of dollars, this is real money. What happens next is usually people see the value of this whole process and they want to streamline their financials. And so some move to different accounting practices. Energy Cap can help you get your bills paid in different ways. And so through this process of change, people just continue to evolve and grow. And this is another step in the process. And lastly, that fifth item there is, it's the idea of the emissions reporting, where you're complying with the expectations that are coming from you or coming at you from the state or from the federal government. And so you're having to meet all these standards, and all these reports, again, is building that momentum and continuing to keep the savings rolling. So some final thoughts on this, just the long-term plan of action. And once again, I am not suggesting that you try to do all of these things in the next couple months before the holiday season. What I'm proposing is put together a plan in the short term, take a look at your stores, think about how you're managing things, and see if there's opportunities to do some things in the short term, and then pursue these other things in the beginning of the year and establish something that can be long-term results for you over the course of time. But these are the benefits of Energy Cap. Energy Cap is going to help you to prevent this waste and spoilage and downtime in refrigeration and facilities. Having all this utility data and looking at it, reviewing it is going to help you there. You're going to be catching more billing errors and inefficiencies, because these things ultimately, because it happens so frequently, this can drain hundreds of dollars, thousands, maybe even millions of dollars from an organization, depending upon its size, because they just get ignored. Gives you great visibility in terms of making these decisions faster and being driven by data. Can improve the accounting workflows, and it can also help support your sustainability efforts, as I've mentioned. So these are all ways Energy Cap can help support you in your role. Now, we've got a couple upcoming webinars and workshops over the next couple of weeks. I just wanted to bring them to your attention if there's anything that we can do to support you and help you. Through our Eco Champions community, there's something on Smart Analytics. It's a live demo. In today's webinar, I showed you some still images of the real-time data. This is a demo on the actual performance of the tool, if you're interested in learning more about that. In the middle of November, we're going to start to talk about the 2026 energy outlook. So keep your eye open for that. And then the 13th of November, we're going to take a look at the Energy Cap roadmap and where Energy Cap is going in the months and years ahead. So those are some upcoming webinars. And with that, what I want to do is thank you for your time and your attention for today's webinar, and see if Madigan, if any questions came in, or if people have questions now that they would like to ask before we round things out.
I do not see any questions right now. Does anybody have any? Do you have any? Raise your hand, put it in the Q&A, the chat. I am not seeing any, Tom. I think that means you covered everything.
Okay, I think we'll take that as a positive. But again, to everybody that's attended today, thank you for taking the time out of your day to spend with me and with Energy Cap to learn more about our product, as well as hopefully I've given you some thoughts and ideas, some strategies to help be a little bit more efficient. So, Madigan, unless you have something else, I'm going to sign off and thank everybody and call it a day.
Yeah, again, the recording and slides will be sent out. But yeah, other than that, thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.